Everybody. There room for one more? You think? You're.
Huh? Do we do one more? One more song. Uh-oh. Oh boy.
That is why my Savior watches over. That's the reason why I'm it's full of joy.
Those are bigger.
Are we ready? One more.
Dave, 69.
One more short one.
On any of the Roku or YouTube. So all they're seeing is my. It looks like it's mine. When the speaker comes on, it'll be the speaker. I'm not telling, I'm not playing.
You can tell him. All right, I think it's Mr. Kimber's turn. Go ahead, Kimber.
Turn your mic on, video on. Okay, after all these things, are we finally ready to go? Okay. Oh, he needs to get that. He'll fix that for you. The the names.
Yeah, we're just minimizing stuff up in the phone, and that should disappear after a while. I think that'll go. Maybe.
Okay, I think we're ready now. Okay, yesterday I talked kind of an introduction to the Torah, what it is and what it isn't, and that we're encouraged to study Deuteronomy and other related aspects of God's law. Well, today I'd like to kind of look into, is it relevant? The things that are in the Torah. Now, I can't talk about everything now, but there's a few things that I'd like to share that are kind of interesting. And, is the Torah relevant for today? I've got a couple of interesting laws here that are actually on the books in some states. They're currently on the books. Here's one from Arizona. No person shall feed garbage to swine without first obtaining a permit from the associate director. All permits shall be renewed during January of each year. This article shall not apply to any person who feeds only his own household garbage to swine, which are raised for his own use. Now, what did God design the swine for? To clean up, right? I never really appreciated pigs until we went to India, where there was pigs all over the place, and they would clean up a lot of stuff that otherwise was very polluting and ugly and all of that. I was glad that there was some cleanup crew there. So I don't know why you would need to have a law that says you can't feed garbage to swine unless you have a permit. I don't know. It just doesn't seem to make sense. Anyhow, here's another one. In Memphis, Tennessee, it is illegal for a woman to drive a car unless there's a man walking ahead, waving a red flag to warn other people on the road. You'd think they'd take that one off the books, but okay. Here's one in Oklahoma. It says it is unlawful for any person to promote, engage in, or be employed at a bear wrestling exhibition or horse tripping event. And it goes on and talks about various other aspects of these things. Have any of you ever been to a bear wrestling event? Do you even know what it is? Or a horse tripping event? Well, I guess bear wrestling was kind of popular back in the 60s and 70s. And they would actually have a bear. You have a picture here of Terrible Ted, the wrestling bear. They would actually have bears wrestling with people, but they would sometimes either give the bear drugs or take out his teeth or take out his claws or whatever to give the person an advantage. And, this law is in here to prevent that type of thing. Now, what's a horse tripping event? What I understand is that they would have a couple of cowboys chasing a running horse, and they would rope his front legs to trip him and throw him down for whatever reason. It was just a contest to see, who could do it. But after the event or during the event, many times the horse was injured, broken legs, rope burns, whatever, to the point where they'd have to kill the horse afterwards to put him out of his misery. This law is in place to prevent those things from happening. So there's a good reason for this law, even though it seems like, we don't have these things happening. This law is in place to prevent them from happening. So there are some old laws that are still good, okay? So what about the Torah? Is there anything in the Torah that applies to us today? Well, we're going to look at some things. These are some things that Ellen White wrote after being in England for a while and observing what was going on there. She says, wealth means greatness and power, poverty, little less than slavery. This is an order of things that God never designed should exist. Nothing of this kind was seen anciently among his people when he was their acknowledged leader. Valuable lessons might be learned by the rulers of today if they would study the plan of government given to the children of Israel. She's saying there are things in the Torah, in the laws that God gave to them, that if governments would follow them today, we'd be a lot better off. Okay. She mentions a few things here. I'll just kind of skim down through to mention the highlighted things. Land was divided among them according to their numbers. No one was allowed to choose the most fertile parts for himself and leave the poor and less desirable portions for his brother. You know, when Joshua came into the land with the people, they were very careful of how they divided it. And then those, a little farther down there, it says, no one was to feel at liberty, either from love of change or a desire to make money, to trade his estate, neither was he to sell his land. And then at the bottom, in the year of Jubilee, it should revert to him. In other words, if somebody did lose their land for whatever reason, they got into financial trouble and they had to mortgage their land in order to have some cash to work with, in the year of Jubilee, the land would go back to them. No, regardless of what had happened before that, the land went back to the original owner. And he would have the privilege of returning to his home and again enjoying it. Thus, the poor and unfortunate were ever to have an equal chance with their more fortunate neighbors. And she goes on and mentions some other things here. Every 7th year, they were commanded to let the land rest. The land gets tired. When I was farming, I let my land rest every 3 years because it would get the nutrients would get depleted for 2 crops, and then I would have a green manure crop that I would plow down to kind of renew the nutrients in the soil and, you know, kind of keep the system working well. Well, here for them, it was every 7th year. We've done that with our garden. Every 7th year, we let the garden rest and, you know, it kind of rejuvenates a little bit. And then we'll actually get more the year before that, enough to last through the next year. And then when we start the year after the 7th year, then we just kind of pick up and keep going. And, you know, we always have enough. Mentions another thing. It was God's land, which they were permitted to possess for a time. God told them, it's my land. You're just using it for a little while. So they had to go by his rules. The Lord set needy human beings before the beasts, but this order has been reversed there. This was talking about in England, and compared with the poor, horses, dogs, and other dumb animals are treated as princes. Well, we see some things similar to that here, and we're starting to see cemeteries specifically for pets, and, you know, all the things that you can buy for your pets, and, you know, I mean, they sometimes live like kings when the people, you know, I've seen people on the street, I hate to call them beggars, but they're out there panhandling, and they'll have an animal with them, and they'll kind of be asking for food for the animal, and they'll get better contributions because they have an animal than if they were just there by themselves. Anyway, if the laws given by God had continued to be carried out, how different would be the present condition of the world morally, spiritually, and temporally. So she's saying we ought to have some of those similar type things nowadays. Okay, which one of these is more important in America? If you mess around with an eagle or his nest, you can get in major legal trouble. 2 years in prison, $100,000 fine, things like that. But you can kill a baby up until birth or even afterwards, I understand. 60 million since 1973, and there's no repercussions for that. Yeah. Moses asked the people, or he was making a statement here, Deuteronomy 4, verses 5 through 8, behold, I have taught you statutes and judgments, even as the Lord my God commanded me, that you should do so in the land whither you go to possess it. Keep therefore and do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the nations, which shall hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what nation is there so great, who hath God so nigh unto them as the Lord our God is in all things that we call upon him for? And what nation is there so great that hath statutes and judgments so righteous as all this law, which I set before you this day? Now, there's various experts that look back in history and on archaeology and all that kind of thing, and they say, we had the Code of Hammurabi back in those days, and Moses just kind of copied the Code of Hammurabi for all these statutes and judgments. So, well, I think that the statutes and judgments that God gave to Moses came before Hammurabi. Anything that Hammurabi had was kind of secondhand, because Moses is saying there is no other nation that has such a good legal system as we have. Okay. I've got this bar at the top here. But anyhow, Exodus 15:26, and God said, if thou wilt diligently hearken unto the voice of thy God, and will do that which is right in his sight, and will give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of these diseases upon thee, which I have brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord that healeth thee. And as they've studied some of the mummies that they've gotten out of the Egyptian tombs, health experts, they've found that some of those mummies have the same kind of diseases that we have today: heart disease, stroke, COPD, cancer, chronic kidney disease, cirrhosis, gout, rheumatoid arthritis, and all kinds of other things. And God was saying, if you follow my ways, I'm not going to let you get sick with these things. And I don't know if there's any medical records of Jews, but I suspect that they don't have very much of this kind of stuff. It's very likely, I've never seen a study on it, but it's very likely that even today, the Jews don't have a lot of these kind of diseases. Anyway, one of the rules that God gave them, Leviticus 3:17, it shall be a perpetual statute for your generations throughout all your dwellings, that you eat neither fat nor blood. Now, there's a good reason for that. What kind of diseases are brought on to us if we eat a high-fat diet? Some of those that were listed were the Egyptians, right? What about blood? What kind of, okay, fat is something that your body uses as a storage place to store things that it doesn't want to use right now. There's all kinds of things that get stored in the fat. Same with animals. And if you eat that fat, you're getting all that stuff. What about the blood? The blood has who knows what all in it, including hormones nowadays. Plus, when an animal is in the slaughterhouse, he's smelling the blood of other slaughtered animals, and it creates terrible stress in the poor thing. And so he gets all these stress hormones, and that's all in there when he's slaughtered himself, and that comes through in the meat. And so we're getting, not we, but those who eat the meat are getting those hormones. And Ellen White has quite a bit to say about the animal propensities that comes through in those hormones and all the other garbage that's in that blood. And how much of what you get in the regular market, Walmart or wherever your meat market is, has the blood drained out. It's all there. I mean, you have to go looking for meat that's kosher, that doesn't have all that garbage. And even that meat probably has other stuff in it. But anyhow, at least it doesn't have the blood. Okay. Here's some things that I found online. This is from a website called Apologetics Press. Moses penned the most advanced, flawless medical prescriptions that had ever been recorded. Furthermore, every statement that pertained to the health and medical well-being of the Israelite nation recorded by Moses could theoretically still be implemented and be completely in accord with every fact modern medicine has learned in regard to germ spreading, epidemic disease control, communal sanitation, and a host of other medical and scientific discoveries. Science and medicine is learning these things, and all these principles that were given to Moses. Even if you didn't know all of the stuff about medicine and drugs and all that kind of stuff, you could apply the things that God gave to Moses to help slow down and help eliminate a lot of the stuff that gets around today. The ancient Egyptians were renowned in the ancient world for their progress in the field of medicine. Dr. Massengill, now this was an author, a medical person that wrote a book, noted that Egypt was the medical center of the ancient world. During the days in the Medo-Persian Empire, the ancient historian Herodotus recorded that it was King Darius's practice to keep in attendance certain Egyptian doctors who had a reputation for the highest eminence in their profession. So the Egyptian doctors were the greatest. Thus, while the medical practices of the Bible could be equally compared to those of other ancient cultures and found to be flawlessly superior, comparing them to that of the eminent Egyptian culture should suffice to manifest the Bible's supernatural superiority in the field. The entire Old Testament contains medical practices that would still be useful in third world countries without a hint of error in regard to a single prescription. Now we're going to look at some of the things that the Egyptians did compared to what was given to the Israelites and Moses. The Kahun Papyri are a collection of ancient Egyptian texts discussing administrative, mathematical, and medical topics. Its many fragments were discovered by Flinders Petrie in 1889 and are kept in the University College of London. It was written about 1825. This was about the time in Egyptian history when Joseph was the prime minister. Okay? And this little quote here comes from Wikipedia. And then here's an excerpt from this Kahun Papyri. Examination of a woman whose eyes are aching till she cannot see, on top of aches in her neck. You should say of it, it is a discharge of the womb in her eyes. You should treat it by fumigating her with incense and fresh oil, fumigating her womb with it, and fumigating her eyes with goose leg fat. You should have her eat a fresh ass liver. So that's the prescription for a woman that's having trouble with her eyes. This is top Egyptian medicine. The London Medical Papyrus is an ancient Egyptian papyrus in the British Museum, London, England. The writings of this papyrus are of 61 recipes, of which 25 are classified as medical, while the remainder are magic. It appears to have been written around 1629, and this was about the time of when the Israelites were in slavery. Okay? It has this introduction. Behold, the darkness of the night enveloped the earth, but the moon cast her beams upon all pages of this book, and it was brought to the treasury of His Majesty King Khufu. Does that sound like good medical practice? Sounds like black magic or voodoo to me. Another one, the Edwin Smith Papyrus is an ancient Egyptian medical text named after the dealer who bought it in 1862 and the oldest known surgical treatise on trauma. This document, which may have been a manual of military surgery, describes 48 cases of injuries, fractures, wounds, dislocations, and tumors. It dates to about 1600, which is shortly before the Israelites left Egypt, somewhere in that era. Ancient Egyptians thought epidemics were caused by disease demons. Okay, now this is a quote from a book that I got called None of These Diseases. It's written by a couple of doctors, anyhow, and they have some quotes from some of these Egyptian prescriptions. Ancient Egyptians thought epidemics were caused by disease demons. The Smith Papyrus provides this formula for protection. It was to be chanted while a person had 2 vulture feathers held over him. And this is what they would say. O flame in his face, O Nekhbet, lifting the earth to the sky for her father. Come thou, bind the 2 feathers around me, that I may live and flourish because I possess this white one. O Caesar of the Great One, son of Sekhmet, mightiest of the mighty, son of the disease demon, flooder of the streams, when thou voyagest in the celestial ocean, when thou sailest in the morning bark, thou hast saved me from every sickness. So is that going to heal your disease? Okay, another one. The Ebers Papyrus is an Egyptian medical papyrus of herbal knowledge dating to around 1550. This was just shortly before the Israelites left Egypt. It is among the oldest and most ancient medical papyri of ancient Egypt. The papyrus contains chapters on contraception, diagnosis of pregnancy and other gynecological matters, intestinal disease and parasites, eye and skin problems, dentistry, and the surgical treatment of abscesses and tumors, bone setting, and burns. And this is a quote or a prescription from there. This document dates from around the time of Moses and the Exodus. It gives us a glimpse into the medical practice of what was the most advanced civilization in the world at that time. Here's a prescription for baldness. So any of you that are wanting some more hair, here's what you do. Apply a mixture of 6 fats from the horse, the hippopotamus, the crocodile, the cat, the snake, and the wild goat. There are hundreds of other prescriptions which include ingredients like statue dust, beetle shells, mouse tails, cat hair, pig eyes, dog toes, breast milk, human semen, eel eyes, and goose guts. That's your pharmacy. To deal with a splinter, the ancient Egyptian physicians would apply a salve of worm blood and donkey dung. Imagine the infection that comes from that. Anyhow, so it was during this era of Egyptian top medical practice that God gave the Israelites the things that are in the Torah. Okay, we're going to look at some of those things. Now, here are some good home remedies that are found in other places in the Bible besides just in the Torah. This is what they did for Hezekiah. Isaiah said, take a lump of figs, and they took it and laid it on the boil, and he, Hezekiah, recovered. Figs, prunes, other kinds of fruit, you can make poultices out of them, and they help to heal and draw out stuff that's, whatever. I've heard various instances of people using those kind of poultices to help with various infections and whatever. There's a lot of different things that can be done like that. Isaiah 1, verse 5 and 6, why should you be stricken anymore? This is talking to the people. You will revolt more and more. The whole head is sick and the whole heart faint. From the sole of the foot even unto the head, there is no soundness in it, but wounds and bruises and putrefying sores. They have not been closed, neither bound up, nor mollified with ointment. And that ointment was most likely olive oil. Olive oil is a good healing thing. And, you got some kind of a skin problem, olive oil might be a helpful thing. Luke 10, 33 and 34 is talking about the story of the Good Samaritan. And this is part of it. A certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was, that is, where the wounded man was. And when he saw him, he had compassion on him and went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring in oil and wine, and set him on his own beast and brought him to an inn and took care of him. And oil, like olive oil, grape juice, has healing properties. These are good things to do. It's not like you're putting in goose guts and donkey dung and that kind of thing. Those. I mean, we've read mission stories of what some of the witch doctors have done in some of those jungle cultures before the missionaries came in. It's horrendous what those people would do supposedly to heal. And, that's what the Egyptians were doing too. Anyway, we'll go on here. In 1847, Ignaz Semmelweis figured out that washing hands was very important in stopping the spread of infection. He was an obstetrician in Vienna, Austria. This was in the university hospital in Vienna at that time. He was very upset that in his maternity ward, 1 out of 6 women would die after childbirth. And they actually had 2 different maternity wards there. He was in charge of one of them. And he had charge of training of, the next generation of medical personnel. And in his maternity ward, they had this high death rate. Well, there was another maternity ward that was run by just midwives. And people, the ladies, the expectant mothers would beg to be put into the maternity ward where the midwives delivered because there wasn't such a high death rate. In his maternity ward, where they had the medical students, they had this high death rate. And if the expectant mothers couldn't get into the other medical maternity ward, they would sometimes just deliver their baby on the street rather than come into this one. Okay. His medical students would perform autopsies on the dead mothers and give their diagnosis, labor fever. Then they would rinse their hands in a bowl of bloody water, wipe them off on a common shared towel, and immediately begin internal examinations on the expectant mothers. You can imagine what would happen. Okay. Dr. Semmelweis suddenly realized something that brought him ridicule from other doctors, but that revolutionized his maternity ward. Something unseen was being transferred from the dead women to the others and causing the deadly infection. Washing hands with a strong antiseptic between examinations brought the death rate of the women down from 18% to 1%. And I saw some of the statistics of some of the years of, how this happened. Before he implemented these practices, it was like 1 in 6 or whatever. But when he had them wash their hands and wipe them on a clean towel rather than just one that everybody else used, there were some of those months and years when there weren't any mothers that died. So this made a big difference. But the other doctors just totally ridiculed him. They said, how can it be possible that a medical person who's kind of the high class of society could possibly pass on something that terrible to somebody? Medical people are high class citizens. It's not possible that they could pass on anything bad. And so they just said, this guy's crazy. This doesn't make any sense. Well, they gave him such a hard time that he got out of the medical practice. He finally ended up going into a mental institution because of the ridicule that he had to deal with. And of course, now we know, Numbers 19:11, he that toucheth the dead body of any man shall be unclean 7 days. There are things that you can pick up from a dead body, whether it's a human or an animal or whatever. There's pathogens there. And God was saying, if you touch anything dead, be really careful. Okay? Numbers 5, 1 through 3. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, command the children of Israel that they put out of the camp every leper, every one that hath an issue, and whosoever is defiled by the dead. Both male and female shall you put out. Without the camp shall you put them, that they defile not their camps, in the midst whereof I dwell. This is talking about quarantine. If you have contact with any of these things, go into quarantine. And then this little quote here from Apologetics Press. In regard to the understanding of contagion implied in the quarantine rules in the Old Testament, McGrew, the author of this book, Encyclopedia of Medical History, said, the idea of contagion was foreign to the classic medical tradition and found no place in the voluminous Hippocratic writings. The Old Testament, however, is a rich source for contagion sentiment, especially in regard to leprosy and venereal disease. Here again, the Old Testament exhibits amazingly accurate medical knowledge that surpasses any known human ingenuity available at the time of its writing. So infections, contact with the dead, leprosy, those things were all supposed to be quarantined. This was a little note that I found on a website called History Stack Exchange, talking about the Black Death and the bubonic plague that went through Europe. Says when the bubonic plague, ravaged Europe in the 14th century, the entire kingdom of Poland was spared. One explanation for this is the following. Okay, bubonic plague went through Europe and people died like flies all over the place. Poland had a lot of Jews, particularly in urban settings. Now, why were Jews less affected? It can be attributed to the sanitary practices of Jewish law. For instance, Jewish law compels one to wash his or her hands many times throughout the day. In the general medieval world, the people at that time, a person could go half of his or her life without ever washing his hands. According to Jewish law, one could not eat food without washing one's hands, leaving the bathroom, and after any sort of intimate human contact. There are a lot of laws about washing and bathing and things like that. We'll look at some of those. At least once a week, a Jew bathed for the Sabbath. Furthermore, Jewish law prevents the Jew from reciting blessings and saying prayers by an open pit, at latrines, or at places with a foul odor. The sanitary condition in the Jewish neighborhood, primitive as it may be by today's standards, was always far superior to the general sanitary conditions. Jewish law also prescribes certain sanitary conditions related to the burial of the dead, leaving corpses unburied, which they a lot of times they did during those plagues. They'd, somebody died, they'd just leave them out on the street until the wagon would come along and pick them up and take them away. Leaving corpses unburied not only abetted the conditions that spread the bubonic plague, but typhus and other diseases as well. The Jews, on the other hand, had a unique sense of community that not only led them to feel a responsibility to attend to the sick and dying, but caused them to always maintain a formal burial society called Kevra Kadisha, whose responsibility it was to make sure that any Jew who died was treated according to Jewish law, including washing the body before it was buried. These are only a few examples of how Jewish law preserved the Jewish people through this terrible, dark period of plague. It imposed a sanitary standard on the Jew far above the ordinary sanitary standard that medieval Europe had. Back in those days, from that time, medieval time, even before that, they probably had no clue of why they should do the things that the Jews did. It's just, God said it, you do it. Well, now we know why they did it. Sanitation, general sanitation. Deuteronomy 23, 12 to 14. Thou shalt have a place also without the camp, whither thou shalt go forth abroad. Now, this is particularly describing their army encampments. Okay, when the whole army was gathered camping, God is telling them, if you have to, eliminate, go outside the camp. Thou shalt have a paddle upon thy weapon, and it shall be when thou wilt ease thyself abroad, thou shalt dig therewith, and shalt turn back and cover that which cometh from thee. For the Lord thy God walketh in the midst of thy camp to deliver thee, and to give up thine enemies before thee. Therefore shalt thy camp be holy, that he see no unclean thing in thee, and turn away from thee. So they were required to bury their excrement, to keep things relatively clean. From the Review and Herald, June 10, 1902, special direction was given to the armies of Israel that everything in and around their tents should be clean and orderly, lest the angel of the Lord, passing through the encampment, should see their uncleanness. Would the Lord be particular to notice these things? He would, for the fact is stated, lest in seeing their uncleanness, he could not go forward with their armies to battle. He who was so particular that the children of Israel should cherish habits of cleanliness will not sanction any impurity in the homes of his people today. God looks with disfavor on uncleanness of any kind. How can we invite him into our homes unless all is neat and clean and pure? That's advising us to keep things real decent in our houses. Okay. There's a lot of different places in the Torah where it uses that phrase or that word unclean, uncleanness and all that. This is an interesting verse from Haggai 2, verse 12 and 13. If one bear holy flesh in the skirt of his garment, and with his skirt do touch bread or pottage or wine or oil or any meat, shall it be holy. So he's carrying something that is considered holy. And if he touches anything else, does it make this other thing holy? And the priests answered and said, no. Then said Haggai, if one that is unclean by a dead body touch any of these, shall it be unclean? And the priests answered and said, it shall be unclean. Okay, holiness can't be transferred from one thing to the other, but uncleanness can be. Well, we know that if you have some kind of germs or viruses, you can pass that on to somebody else. But if you're healthy, you can't pass your health on to somebody else. It only makes sense. In 2 Corinthians 6:17, wherefore come out from among them and be separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you. Now this is talking about spiritual uncleanness, but it relates to the same principles as physical uncleanness. You associate with somebody that has a contagious disease, you're most likely going to get it. If you're associating with people that are living in sin, it can draw you backward, okay? Review and Herald, January 2, 1900. You are exhorted to touch not the unclean thing, for in touching this, you will yourself become unclean. It is impossible for you to unite with those who are corrupt and still remain pure. What fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness? What communion hath light with darkness? What concord hath Christ with Belial? God and Christ and the heavenly host would have man know that if he unites with the corrupt, he will become corrupt. Ample provision has been made that we may be raised from the lowlands of earth and have our affections fastened upon God and upon heavenly things. You know, I've worked in environments that aren't the best spiritually. And if you're there for very long, it kind of starts wearing on you, and you kind of let some of your defenses go down after a while. And I've had it happen where I did and said things because of that influence that I regretted later. And I thought, why did I do that? I know better than that. We need to be really careful of our associations because uncleanness can be passed on. Quarantine after childbirth. This one is kind of interesting. Leviticus 12, 1 through 5. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, If a woman have conceived seed and born a man child, then she shall be unclean 7 days. According to the days of the separation for her infirmity shall she be unclean. And the 7-day thing kind of applied to several different female issues where, you know, the monthly cycle and all that. Anyhow, after childbirth, she was also unclean for 7 days. In the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. Okay, so the 8th day, he was circumcised. Then she shall continue in the blood of her purifying 33 days, which is 40 days total. Okay, 7 days plus 33 days is 40 days. This is for a boy baby. She shall touch no hallowed thing, nor come into the sanctuary until the days of her purifying be fulfilled. But if she bear a maid child, a baby girl, then she shall be unclean 2 weeks, in other words, 14 days, as in her separation, and she shall continue in the blood of her purifying 66 days, which is 80 days total. Now, why the difference between a boy baby and a girl baby? Why even quarantine for that long? Well, they're finding out that a baby's immune system has to develop over a period of time, and it takes about 2 to 3 months for it to be fully developed to the point where they can basically fight off various things. And there seems to be an indication that boy babies develop their immune system faster than girls. So the 40 days for boys, 80 days for girls. Now, the people of Israel had no clue of that, but we're learning some of these things now. Circumcision. The 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. Leviticus 12:3. When a baby is born, a baby boy, he starts out with his ability to clot blood quite low. And, you know, that's the level of prothrombin. That's the clotting factor in the blood. It's fairly low when he's first born. But it builds up over the next few days. And on the 7th day, it's actually higher than normal. It's like at 110% of normal. So if there's any cutting on the baby at that time, it's much quicker to clot and heal than any time before or after. So there's a good reason for circumcising on the 7th day or the 8th day, because the clotting factor is much higher at that time. Well, you know, you can maybe wait until later on in life and be circumcised later, but then you got the pain factor too, which is pretty difficult to deal with. So, you know, there's a good reason to circumcise at that particular time. And God knew that. He designed it that way. And so he's just saying, here's how you do it. You know, I think of the Bible almost like an owner's manual. You know, you buy a refrigerator, you get a car, you get a stereo, whatever it is, you get an owner's manual. And the owner's manual tells you how to get the best service from whatever you bought. Well, the Bible is like our owner's manual. It tells us how to get the best out of life. And here's just one of the details. Okay, now we got some things here on clean and unclean foods. Leviticus 11. In 1953, an extensive study performed by David Macht tested the toxicity of the meat of animals listed in Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14. Mach's technique was to place seeds of the white lupin, this is a plant, in fresh muscle juices of the various animals noted as clean and unclean in the biblical text. He would take a control group of seedlings that grew in normal solutions and compare that group to seedlings placed in the various meat juices. So he, somehow he got this solution from a cow, a goat, a sheep, a pig, a camel, whatever. So he was, comparing these things. He would then record the percent of seeds that grew in the meat juices as compared to those that grew under normal circumstances. For example, when placing the seedlings in meat juices from the ox, the seeds grew 91% as often as they would if placed in a regular growing solution. Seeds in sheep juices grew 94% as often as those in the control group. Seedlings in meat juice from a calf, 82%, from a goat, 90%, from a deer, 90%. So that's a fairly high percentage. When several unclean animals were studied, however, they showed significantly higher levels of toxicity and much lower levels of seedling growth. Seedlings in meat juice from pigs grew only 54% as often as the control group under normal growing conditions. From the rabbit, 49%, camel, 41%, from the horse, 39%. That's pretty low percentage. So there's something in that meat, in those juices, that keeps those things from growing. These results for larger mammals suggested that the biblical division between clean and unclean could have been related to the toxicity of the juices of such animals. Those of you that are familiar with Walter Veith, he did a lot of research on animals and the different kind of things. He's got some videos on the differences between clean and unclean animals and what research has found about why there are those differences and some of that. You can go on the website for what is it? What is his website? He's got a new one now. Yeah, Clash of Minds is a new one. Amazing Discoveries, yeah. And you can find some of those older videos that he made several years back, but he's got some interesting stuff there about the differences between clean and unclean. And we're seeing some of that same kind of thing here. Okay, here's another one. Mach did similar research on birds, in which he found that extracts from the biblical clean birds, such as the pigeon and quail, grew his seedlings 93% and 89%, while those from unclean birds, such as the red-tailed hawk, 36%, and the owl, 62%, were much more toxic. Other studies include several different kinds of fish. The biblical regulation for eating fish was that the Israelites could eat any fish that had fins and scales. That's from Deuteronomy 14, verse 9. Those water-living creatures that did not possess fins and scales were not to be eaten. That's in the next verse, verse 10. In regard to his study on the toxicity of fish, Mach wrote, "Of special interest were experiments made with muscle juices and also blood solutions obtained from many species of fishes. 54 species of fishes were so far studied in regard to toxicity of meat extracts. It was found that the muscle extracts of those fishes which possess scales and fins were practically non-toxic. Herring, 100%, pike, 98%, shad, 100%, while muscle extracts from fishes without skin, scales, and fins were highly toxic for the growth of this particular plant that he was experimenting with." So there are reasons for the Lord's directions on which ones are clean and which ones aren't. Reptiles are included in the list of unclean animals, and some of them that are listed there is the large lizard, the gecko, the monitor lizard, sand reptile, sand lizard, and chameleon. Immediately following this listing of reptiles, the text states, "Whoever touches them when they are dead shall be unclean until evening," Leviticus 11:31. Interestingly, reptiles have a much higher rate of carrying salmonella bacteria than do most mammals, especially those listed as clean in the old law. The Center for Disease Control has repeatedly warned people about the possibility of being infected with salmonella passing through reptiles. And I've heard that, if you have a pet turtle or a pet lizard or whatever, be careful because there's a high chance of getting an infection. As high as 90% of reptiles are natural carriers of salmonella bacteria, harboring strains specific to reptiles without any symptoms of disease in the reptile. While it is true that many pets can carry salmonella. The problem with reptiles and apparently amphibians is that they carry salmonella with such high frequency. It is prudent to assume that all reptiles and amphibians can be a potential source of salmonella. Salmonella contamination can occur without even touching a reptile. If a person touches something that has touched a reptile, the bacteria can spread. The Association of Reptilian and Amphibian Veterinarians made this statement: Salmonella bacteria are easily spread from reptiles to humans. Humans may become infected when they place their hands on objects, including food items that have been in contact with the stool of reptiles in their mouths. And then Leviticus 11:32-34, anything on which any of them falls when they are dead shall be unclean, whether it is any item of wood or clothing or skin or sack, whatever item it is in which any work is done, it must be put in water, and it shall be unclean until evening. Then it shall be clean. So they were supposed to wash it out. Any earthen vessel into which any of them falls, you shall break. Well, an earthen vessel is, pottery type things like that. Those things can absorb fluids and it stays in there. Any earthen vessel into which any of them falls, you shall break, and whatever is in it shall be unclean. In such a vessel, any edible food upon which water falls becomes unclean, and any drink that may be drunk from it becomes unclean. So, of all these different creatures that God is specifying as being clean and unclean, there are good reasons why he said that. Deuteronomy 32:40-45-47, Moses made an end of speaking all these words to all Israel, and he said unto them, set your hearts unto all the words which I testify among you this day, which you shall command your children to observe to do, all the words of this law. For it is not a vain thing for you, because it is your life, and through this thing you shall prolong your days in the land whither you go over Jordan to possess it. Most of what I've shared here has to do with health stuff. There's a lot of health principles given there. And, to those people, they had no clue of why they were doing it. It's just God said it, so you do it. Well, now we know why they did it. Well, there's other things that maybe we haven't figured out why we should do it. And a lot of people say, well, that's just tradition. That's just Jewish stuff. We don't need to do any of that. Well, maybe there's a good reason. Maybe we just haven't figured out the reason yet. So it would be good to pay attention to these things and do those things that have to do with health, and a lot of even these other things that we're going to get into the next session that I do, which is, let's see, today is Monday. Wednesday, I'll have another session. We'll be talking about some of those things. If God knew what he was doing, what he was saying in giving these health rules, he knew what he was doing and saying when he gave the other principles. God is a lot smarter than we are. I think we all agree on that. And there are reasons why he says what he says. So pay attention to what God says. And even if you don't understand it, it's a good idea to go ahead and do it anyway. It's like little kids don't understand what their parents tell them, but there's a good reason for it, and they'll understand later. So I'll put this up there again, the Torah Connection, in case any of you are interested, the website and our email address. So, thank you.
Okay, I just wanted to add, I was in California and we went to see the lizards, in the pet store when Christopher was little. And I was like, oh, they're so cute. And they had a sink right there. And I didn't know why. And the lady came up and said, if you touch those, make sure you wash your hands well. I was like, well, that's strange. And then you find out that, that was one of his rules. And as far as all the cleanliness for all the days and all that stuff, people have wondered about that. Some of it, I suppose, is a good idea, but you got to remember, like Daddy said, they had millions of Israelites way back in the middle of the desert. They didn't have corner stores. They didn't have plumbing. They didn't have anything. So things are a lot different nowadays. You can stay cleaner, easier, and keep yourself clean and all that kind of stuff without having to not touch anybody for ever. But anyway.
Go to the Valley of Sin, water is very scarce there. It's like a desert.
Yeah,
That's why the children of Israel did not have very much water. That's what
right.
it is.
So they couldn't stay clean. They didn't have the water. They didn't have anything. And they were just a bunch of people and then all the animals and all the sacrifices. So there was blood everywhere. And how did they do that one?
Blood everywhere.
Yeah, so there was blood that way too. So I don't know how they kept it clean. But anyway, so they're very good rules that makes you wonder and think that, not wonder, but no, God knew and he knows. All right, I guess that's it. Does anybody have anything to add or say?
I was just gonna
I mean,
say,
so it wouldn't.
I love that
Echo.
verse that says, and the people, well, yeah, I mean,
Chris, did you want to say anything? We can't hear you. We don't hear you.
That was a really good message. Thank you.
I can hear Chris.
I was gonna say, when it says when God says they shall be a wise and understanding people, it means a lot.
Chris, we can't
Because
hear you if you're
that,
talking to us.
Those are all of God's people. When you read the Bible, understand those
I hope
things.
they heard me.
That's you understanding those things. That's a good feeling.
We don't hear you, Chris.
I could hear him.
We didn't hear a thing. I have no idea. I hope you guys
Turn up the
heard me.
sound
I
on
hope they did on YouTube. Maybe nobody did.
Can't hear me.
I could hear
Did you
you,
hear me,
Chris.
Marty?
I can hear him too.
Okay.
I can hear him.